They called it Greenland. It was a lie. A magnificent, audacious, world-changing lie, told by a murderer standing on the bow of a wooden ship, staring at a wall of ice, and thinking not of what he saw, but of what he needed others to believe. His name was Erik Thorvaldsson. History would remember him as Erik the Red. And in the year 985 AD, he looked upon one of the harshest landscapes on Earth and decided to sell it as paradise. This is not the story of a discovery. This is the story of survival at the edge of the known world. It is the story of a people who built churches from stone and homes from the frozen earth itself, who raised cattle where no cattle should have lived, who carved a civilization into a land that wanted them dead from the moment they arrived. For nearly 500 years, the Norse clung to the western shores of this impossible island. They baptized their children. They buried their dead. They traded walrus ivory with kings and popes across an ocean. And then, one day, they vanished. Every man, every woman, every child, gone, swallowed by the silence of the ice, leaving behind only ruins and a question that has haunted historians for centuries. What killed the Vikings of Greenland? To understand the answer, we must first walk through the world they built. We must see it as they saw it. And thanks to the most advanced AI reconstruction technology ever applied to the medieval North Atlantic, that is exactly what we are about to do. Welcome to Greenland. The year is 1050 AD. The world is warm. And against all odds, it is alive. The Voyage of the Red. Before we can understand Greenland, we must understand the man who created it. Not created the land, of course. The ice and rock had been there for millennia. But Erik the Red created the idea of Greenland. He transformed a frozen wasteland into a destination. And he did it because he had no other choice. Erik was a man defined by violence. His father, Thorvald Asvaldsson, had been exiled from Norway for killing a man. The family fled to Iceland, that younger Viking colony perched on the edge of the habitable world. But exile, it seems, ran in the blood. By 982 AD, Erik himself had been banished from Iceland for his own murders. 3 years of outlawry, 3 years during which any Icelander could kill him without consequence, so he sailed west. He sailed into legend. The journey was not into the unknown. Norse sailors had glimpsed the coast of Greenland before. Gunnbjorn Olfsson had spotted it decades earlier when blown off course, but no one had explored it. No one had dared to imagine it as a home. Erik spent his exile years charting the southwestern coast. He found fjords that cut deep into the land, protected from the worst of the Arctic winds. He found valleys where grass grew green in the brief summer months. He found, against all probability, a place where people might survive. And when his exile ended, he returned to Iceland with a single purpose: recruitment. Here is where the lie becomes genius. Erik named this brutal island Greenland. Not because it was green, not because it was hospitable, but because, as the medieval Icelandic text explains, he believed people would be more eager to go there if the land had an attractive name. It was marketing. Pure and simple. The first real estate scheme of the medieval world. It worked. In the summer of 985 or 986 AD, a fleet of 25 ships set sail from Iceland. They carried somewhere between 400 and 700 settlers, along with their livestock, their tools, their seeds, and their desperate hope. 14 ships made it. 11 were lost to the sea or turned back. But those who arrived found exactly what Erik had promised. The fjords were real. The grass was real. And in those first warm decades, the dream of Greenland seemed possible. Would you have gone? If a convicted murderer told you that paradise waited just beyond the horizon, would you have loaded your family onto a wooden ship and sailed into the unknown? Before you answer, remember this. The people who said yes built a civilization that lasted nearly 5 centuries. The people who said no are forgotten. The shape of a colony. The Norse did not scatter across Greenland. They could not. The island is the largest on Earth, but its interior is a permanent ice sheet, 2 miles thick in places, covering 80% of the land. Life was only possible along the narrow coastal margins, in the fjords where mountains blocked the wind and summer sun could warm the thin soil. 2 settlements emerged. The eastern settlement, despite its name, sat at the southern tip of the island, near modern-day Qeqertok. This was the larger of the two, eventually home to perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 people at its peak. The western settlement lay 400 miles to the northwest, smaller, more isolated, more vulnerable, perhaps 1,000 souls. Between them stretched nothing, no roads, no communication lines, just ice and rock, and the occasional hunting party making the dangerous journey north to find the walrus herds that would become the colony's economic lifeblood. Let us walk through the eastern settlement as it appeared around the year 1100 AD. The AI reconstruction you are seeing draws on decades of archaeological excavation, analysis of pollen cores, and architectural studies of surviving ruins. This is not fantasy. This is history made visible. The first thing you would notice is the green. During the medieval warm period, average temperatures in the North Atlantic were 1 to 2 degrees Celsius higher than today. That difference sounds small. It was everything. It meant longer growing seasons. It meant fjords that stayed ice-free for more months of the year. It meant grass, lush and abundant, covering the valley floors. The second thing you would notice is the smell. Cattle, sheep, goats. The Norse brought their pastoral lifestyle with them from Scandinavia, and they refused to abandon it even at the edge of the world. A successful Greenlandic farm might support 20 to 30 cattle, with larger estates running even more. The animals meant milk, cheese, butter, meat in the autumn slaughter. They meant survival. The farmsteads spread along the fjords, each one claiming the best grazing land it could. At the center of each farm stood the longhouse. Not the wooden structures of Norway or Iceland. Wood was precious in Greenland, reserved for roof beams, door frames, and furniture. The walls were built from stone and turf, thick slabs of earth cut from the ground and stacked like bricks. These walls could be 6 feet thick, sometimes more. Inside the longhouse was a single great room, dark and smoky, heated by a long central hearth. Sleeping platforms lined the walls, covered with furs and woolen blankets. The family lived together in the space, along with their servants and slaves. Privacy was not a concept that applied to the Norse. At the end of a longhouse, a small room might be partitioned off. This was the skema, the storage room, where preserved food was kept through the long winter. Dried fish, smoked meat, barrels of butter and cheese. The difference between life and death, measured in calories. Outside, smaller buildings clustered around the longhouse. Barns for the animals, essential to protect them from the winter cold. Storage sheds, a smithy perhaps, where iron tools were repaired and recycled, because iron was almost as precious as wood in a land with no ore deposits. And beyond the farm, if you walked for an hour, you might reach the next homestead. Then another, and another, scattered along the fjords like beads on a string, each one a pocket of warmth and life in the vastness of the Arctic landscape. Could you live like this? Could you endure months of darkness, temperatures that froze the sea solid, winds that screamed down from the ice sheet? Could you bet your children's lives on a few dozen cattle and the hope that summer would come again? The people of Greenland did. For generations they did. The churches of the edge. The Norse brought more than cattle to Greenland. They brought their faith. And when the colony converted to Christianity around the year 1000 AD, following the conversion of Iceland and Norway, they began to build churches. We know of at least 16 churches in the eastern settlement and perhaps 4 in the western settlement. Most were small parish churches serving a single community. But some were grander, built of stone that would last 1,000 years. The Hausa Church is the best preserved of all Norse structures in Greenland. Even today, its walls stand 16 feet high, a testament to the skill of medieval masons working at the edge of the world. The AI reconstruction you are seeing shows it as it appeared around 1300 AD. A simple rectangular structure, perhaps 60 feet long and 25 feet wide, with thick walls of carefully fitted stone, no mortar. The Norse of Greenland built their stone structures dry, fitting each block precisely against its neighbors. This was not a limitation but an adaptation. Mortar freezes and cracks in Arctic temperatures. Dry stone flexes and settles. Inside, the church was whitewashed, the walls gleaming in the dim light that filtered through small windows. A wooden altar stood at the eastern end. Wooden benches lined the walls. The floor was packed earth, worn smooth by generations of worshippers. This was where the community gathered. For Mass, for baptisms, for weddings, for funerals. In a world without written law codes, without formal courts, without any of the institutions we associate with civilization, the church provided structure, identity, meaning. The colony eventually had its own bishop, resident at Gardar, the ecclesiastical capital of the eastern settlement. Gardar was the largest farm in Greenland, with a cathedral, a residence for the bishop, and extensive agricultural lands. Archaeological excavation has revealed the bones of hundreds of cattle at the site, evidence of the wealth that flowed to the church through tithes and donations. But the church also meant obligation. Tithes extracted resources from a colony that had little to spare, and the bishop was appointed by the Archbishop of Nidaros in Norway, a reminder that Greenland, however distant, remained connected to the power structures of medieval Europe. That connection was both lifeline and chain, the currency of teeth. How does a colony survive at the edge of the world? How does it acquire the goods it cannot make? Iron, timber, grain, cloth, all the necessities of medieval life that Greenland could not produce. The answer came from the sea, specifically from the mouths of walruses. Walrus ivory was the foundation of the Greenlandic economy. The tusks of the Atlantic walrus, harvested during dangerous summer hunting expeditions to the Nordsecher, the hunting grounds far to the north, were the colony's primary export. This ivory was prized throughout medieval Europe. It was carved into religious objects, game pieces, tool handles, and luxury goods. Before elephant ivory became widely available through the Crusades, walrus ivory was the material of choice for the finest craftsmen. The Lewis chessmen, those famous medieval chess pieces now divided between the British Museum and the National Museum of Scotland, were likely carved from Greenlandic walrus ivory. When you look at those small figures, you are looking at the product of a supply chain that stretched from the frozen waters north of Greenland to the workshops of Trondheim and beyond. The hunters who obtained this ivory faced extraordinary dangers. The Nordseter lay hundreds of miles from the settlements, reachable only by open boat during the brief Arctic summer. The walrus herds congregated on rocky shores and ice floes, and hunting them required approaching close enough to strike with harpoons and lances. A wounded walrus could easily kill a man. The cold sea could kill even faster, but the rewards were worth the risk. A single hunting expedition might bring back hundreds of pounds of ivory, enough to trade for a year's worth of imports. The colony also exported walrus hide rope, extraordinarily strong and valued for ship rigging throughout the medieval north. Polar bear skins went to European courts as exotic luxuries. Live polar bears, on rare occasions, were sent as gifts to kings. This was the economy of Greenland, not agriculture, though agriculture sustained daily life. Not fishing, though the Norse ate fish when they had to, but hunting. The systematic extraction of resources from one of the harshest environments on Earth. And it worked. For centuries, it worked. The other people. The Norse were not alone. When Erik the Red arrived in Greenland, he found traces of earlier inhabitants, stone tools, tent rings, the remains of hunting camps. The people who had left these traces were long gone, part of an earlier migration that had swept through the Arctic and then retreated. But they would return. The Thule people, ancestors of the modern Inuit, began expanding eastward from Alaska around 1000 AD. Within 2 centuries, they had crossed the Canadian Arctic and reached Greenland. By 1300 AD, they were living in the same fjords as the Norse. The encounter between these two peoples is one of the great mysteries of medieval history. We have almost no written records of contact. Norse sources mention the Skraelings, a term used for indigenous peoples throughout the North Atlantic, but provide little detail. Thule oral traditions, recorded centuries later, speak of encounters with the Norse, but their accuracy is difficult to assess. What we know comes primarily from archaeology, and archaeology tells a story of two peoples living very different lives in the same landscape. The Norse clung to their European identity. They raised cattle. They built churches. They wore woven woolen clothing. They used iron tools. They traded with Europe and thought of themselves as Europeans, however distant from the centers of power. The Thule adapted to the Arctic. They hunted seals and whales from kayaks and umiaks. They built winter houses from stone, turf, and whalebone. They wore clothing of sewn animal skins, far superior to wool for retaining heat. They had developed, over thousands of years, a toolkit and a lifestyle perfectly suited to the environment. Look at the two cultures side by side. The Norse farmstead, with its long house and barns and pastures. The Thule winter camp, with its semi-subterranean houses clustered near the best hunting grounds. Both successful. Both sustainable. But only one would survive. There is evidence of trade between the two peoples. Thule sites contain Norse artifacts, fragments of woven cloth and worked metal. Norse sites contain occasional pieces of Thule bone and ivory craftsmanship. The relationship may have been peaceful, for the most part. Two peoples occupying different ecological niches, interacting at the margins. But there is also evidence of violence. A Thule tradition recorded in the 18th century tells of a Norse attack on a Thule camp. A Norse source from the 1350s describes an attack by Skraelings on the western settlement. The truth is buried beneath centuries of silence. If you were a Norse farmer watching Thule hunters in their kayaks, gliding across the water with impossible grace, what would you think? Would you admire their skill? Fear their difference? Consider, even for a moment, learning from them. The Norse, it seems, did not learn. And that choice, that stubborn refusal to adapt, may have sealed their fate. The daily round. Let us spend a day in the life of a Greenlandic farm. The year is 1200 AD. The settlement is thriving. The climate is still warm enough for cattle. The trade routes to Europe are still open. You wake before dawn. This means nothing in summer, when the sun barely sets, and everything in winter, when the sun barely rises. The longhouse is dark regardless, lit only by the fire in the central hearth and a few soapstone lamps burning seal oil. Breakfast is skyr, a thick, cultured dairy product similar to yogurt. Perhaps some dried fish. Buttermilk to drink. The Norse diet was heavy on dairy, heavier than anywhere else in the medieval world. The cattle were the center of everything. Your first task of the day is the animals. The cattle must be fed. In summer, they graze in the pastures. In winter, they survive on hay, cut and dried during the precious warm months. A farm might need to store 30 tons of hay to see its herd through the winter. Cutting that hay, drying it, storing it, was the defining labor of the summer season. The sheep and goats are hardier. They can forage on their own longer into the autumn. But they too need attention. Shearing, milking, slaughter when the time comes. By mid-morning, other work begins. Repairs to the buildings, always needed in a climate that punishes any weakness in construction. Fishing in the fjord, gathering driftwood along the shore, precious material that washed across the Atlantic from the forests of America and Siberia. Collecting seabird eggs from the cliff faces. Hunting seals when they appeared in the waters. The women spin wool into thread. They weave cloth on upright looms. They preserve food, an endless task in a world without refrigeration. They care for children, born into a life harder than any European child would know. By evening, you return to the longhouse. The main meal of the day is served. Boiled meat, perhaps. Barley porridge, if the harvest was good. Fish, always fish. The Greenlandic Norse ate fish reluctantly, it seems. Analysis of their bones shows that early generations consumed little fish, relying instead on their cattle and sheep. Only later, as the climate cooled, did fish become a larger part of the diet. After the meal, stories. The Norse were a people of words, sagas, poems, genealogies reaching back generations. In the long winter evenings, with the wind howling outside, the community gathered around the fire and remembered who they were. Then sleep. Then wake. Then do it again. This was life at the edge of the world. Repetitive, exhausting, but sustainable as long as the climate held. The turn of the world. The medieval warm period did not last forever. Nothing does. Beginning around 1250 AD and accelerating through the 1300s, temperatures in the North Atlantic began to drop. Sea ice expanded. Growing seasons shortened. The fjords that had been ice-free for much of the year now froze solid for longer and longer periods. This was the beginning of what climate scientists call the Little Ice Age. It would last, with fluctuations, until the 19th century. For most of Europe, it meant hardship. For Greenland, it meant catastrophe. The signs of decline are visible in the archaeological record. Cattle bones become rarer in the Middens, replaced by seal bones. The dietary analysis of human remains shows a shift away from dairy and toward marine resources. The pastures were failing. The hay was not enough. The cattle, those precious symbols of Norse identity, were dying. And yet the Norse did not adapt. They did not adopt the hunting techniques of the Thule. They did not build kayaks. They did not learn to hunt whales. They clung, with a stubbornness that seems almost tragic in retrospect, to the way of life their ancestors had brought from Europe. Why? This is the question that haunts every student of Norse Greenland. Why did they not change? Perhaps it was identity. The cattle, the churches, the trade with Europe. These were not just economic activities. They were what made the Norse who they were. To abandon them was to become something else, something they could not imagine being. Perhaps it was knowledge. The skills needed to survive as Thule hunters were not easily learned. They required generations to develop, specialized equipment to build, a fundamentally different relationship with the environment to embrace. Perhaps it was hope. Every cold summer might be followed by a warm one. Every failed harvest might be redeemed by a good year. Perhaps next year, the ships from Europe would come. Perhaps next year, everything would be better. The ships stopped coming. The Western settlement was abandoned sometime around 1350 AD. A Norwegian priest named Ivar Barderson visited the area and reported finding no people, only wild cattle roaming the empty farms. What happened to the inhabitants, he could not say. The eastern settlement held on longer. The last written record from Norse Greenland is a marriage certificate from 1408 AD, documenting a wedding at Halsey Church. The couple were named Thorstein Olafsson and Sigrid Bjornsdotter. They were married on September 14. They exchanged vows in a stone church that still stands. Then silence. No more records. No more contact. When Europeans returned to Greenland in the 18th century, they found only ruins. The vanishing. What killed the Vikings of Greenland? We do not know. We may never know. The theories multiply. Climate change, isolation from Europe, conflict with the Thule, disease, soil exhaustion, a combination of all these factors, feeding on each other in a spiral of collapse. The Black Death reached Norway in 1349 and killed perhaps half the population. Trade with Greenland, never frequent, may have ceased entirely. A colony dependent on imported iron, imported grain, imported everything that made European life possible, was suddenly cut off from its supply lines. The cooling climate made agriculture increasingly impossible. The sea ice that had once opened for summer trade now blocked the shipping lanes for years at a time. The walrus ivory that had sustained the economy faced competition from elephant ivory, flowing into Europe through new trade routes opened by the Crusades. The market collapsed just as the ability to supply it disappeared, and the Thule were there, not as conquerors perhaps. The evidence for large-scale conflict is thin, but as competitors for resources, as a reminder that another way of life was possible, a way of life that the Norse, for whatever reason, could not bring themselves to adopt. The last of them may have died in place, starving in their farms as the cattle perished and the winters grew longer. They may have attempted to sail for Europe, their ships lost in the ice-choked seas. They may have been absorbed into the Thule population, though genetic evidence for this is limited. Or they may have simply given up, walked out into the ice, chosen an ending rather than an endless struggle. We do not know. The silence is complete. The echoes walk with me through the ruins of Halsey Church one last time. The AI reconstruction fades, and we see it as it exists today, roofless, empty. The walls still standing after 600 years of abandonment. This is what remains, stone and silence. But what remains is also a story. The story of people who sailed to the edge of the world and built a life there, who raised children and buried their dead and worshiped their God in a land that had no right to support them, who held on for nearly 500 years against odds that would have broken almost anyone else. They failed in the end. The ice won, the cold won. The world changed, and they could not change with it. But before they failed, they lived, and their living matters. It matters because it shows us what human beings are capable of. The stubborn, beautiful, heartbreaking capacity to cling to hope, even when hope is unreasonable. To build churches at the edge of the abyss. To name a frozen wasteland, Greenland, and somehow make others believe it. Does this feel like ancient history? 1,000 years ago, and a place most of us will never see? Or does it feel uncomfortably familiar? We too live in a warming world that may soon begin to cool. We too depend on trade networks that span the globe, networks that could collapse more quickly than we imagine. We too face choices about adaptation, about identity, about what we are willing to change and what we will cling to, even as the ground shifts beneath our feet. The Norse of Greenland are not a cautionary tale. They are a mirror. Look into it. What do you see? A closing word. Thank you for walking through this world with me today. History is not a museum of dead facts. It is a living conversation between the present and the past. A chance to understand not just what happened, but what it means. The Vikings of Greenland left no final testament. They could not have imagined that 1,000 years later we would reconstruct their farms and churches and wonder about their fate. But here we are, remembering them, learning from them, keeping their story alive. Until next time, I'm Christopher, and this has been a journey to the edge of the medieval world. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and never stop asking questions about the past. It is the only way we will understand the future.